I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your counsellor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hello everyone, welcome back to TGU. We've been off for a couple of weeks, but I'm pleased to say it's time to catch up on all the latest council governance related news. And to help me unpack it this week is Tony Rownick from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors. Hi Tony.
Oh, what a few weeks to take a break, Chris. Been a lot going on and lots to unpack today.
We've had the occasional week or two when there hasn't been much to talk about. Why could it not have been that way? But anyway. Let's touch on the main things. And of course, the big one, Tony, is the increasing number of disruptions to council meetings that have been happening. It's getting quite a bit of media attention. I think David Clark, the MAV president, was quoted as saying as many as 15 councils in Victoria have had meetings targeted by these, I want to call them far right, extreme sort of view groups. They go by various names. It's a disturbing trend.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just been a litany of incidents over the past couple of months, and you know, on the back of, I think, increasingly seeing over the last couple of years, I've seen in perhaps more in the background this kind of more aggressive sort of approach from people who are quite anti local government institution itself. We seem to have kind of an amalgam of, you know, anti 5G, anti 20-minute neighbourhoods,
anti-inclusion, anti-LGBTIQA plus, anti-local government existing as a form of government that can charge rates, you name it.
Yeah, I think that the theme that just brings them all together is this kind of intense kind of distrust of government institutions, including local government.
So the really high-profile one the last few days has been Monash, and this has been up and down a bit. So Monash, one of the libraries, had planned a drag queen storytime event. There was pressure on the council to cancel that event. A group of, I believe, about 200 people turned up to their meeting last week. They withstood that pressure and confirmed their support for the event. But subsequently, as of yesterday, Tony, on Victoria Police advice, they've cancelled the event because, and this is the real concerning thing, isn't it? Because they can't guarantee the safety of the participants, of councillors, of council staff, the families that might be attending that event.
Yeah, and I think similar things at Casey, you know, having to cancel events on Victoria Police advice, security, you know, police call to Whittlesea Council meetings. We've had Yarra Rangers Council having to, you know, for the time being, you know, not have a public gallery at their meetings, so
that's a pretty big step to take, isn't it? Just not having a public gallery at all.
Really, really significant. And, you know, as a starting point, I would say I'm absolutely pro debate. I think we don't solve any of our differences if we don't allow for a debate. And there's a really, I think, rich history in local government of the community, you know, coming along to council meetings and sometimes with placards and making their point and asking questions at public question time. However, you know, when it comes to this, you know, shutting down the process, making people feel unsafe, calling councillors pedophiles, you know, this intimidatory type behaviour, then all of us who, you know, believe in this, you know, flawed institution called local government, but, you know, really want to come out and defend the, you know, the ability of us to continue to operate in that democratic, open way and condemn these kind of extreme positions that are being taken, which are like, I can't even hear an alternate view. I can't even allow council to have a discussion without shouting that down and you know, intimidating people. I think that is just, it seems like it's a worldwide phenomenon.
It is, Tony. I was going to make that point, and not just at the local level here, but at other levels of government. Certainly, I've just come back from the States, and it's a very hot topic of discussion, the divide across the country with the two different main sort of views. that are there. I was thinking, as you were saying, it's like that old saying, if you're in an argument, if you're the one that goes to obscenities or name calling, you've lost the argument. And I want to commend Councillor Josh Fergus from Monash, who's been quite public on this issue in the last few days, made a really good point that it's not the people who are engaging in respectful, reasoned debate that are the problem here. It's those extremists that are going to threats of violence, and we just all have to band together and say it's unacceptable. Understandably, a lot of people are upset that the event's been cancelled because they see it as giving in to the bullies.
Yeah, and I certainly do appreciate that view, but as I say, you know, it's right that the community should be able to express concerns and come along and ask, you know, direct questions at council meetings. And even, you know, I've been at council meetings where people have come along with their placards and silently, if you like, had their say in the background.
As have I, Tony, many times.
That's right.
Yes.
And you know, haven't always agreed with them. In fact, often didn't agree with them, but I certainly defend their right to make their point and to ask questions and to write letters. But you know, this phenomenon where we seem to go into camps where we all agree with each other within that camp, and anyone else with an alternate view is you know, somehow criminal, you know, is a disgraceful person. It's just not a way for us to solve our differences. And you know, what do these people want? Do they want to get rid of local democracy? Do they want a dictatorship? You know, to me, it's just really sad. And I think if they thought about, you know, some of the behaviours that were occurring there, they realise that it reflects really poorly on them as individuals who might be associated with those behaviours.
Ida Hobbit Day is coming up on the 17th of this month, so I suspect, sadly, that we'll be hearing more about this. I just want to come back in a moment to what Latrobe City Council has done this week. But I want to get your thoughts on this approach. Up at the Blue Mountains City Council last week, there was a group disrupting a council meeting where they were voting on a motion of support for the LGBTQ plus community. And the mayor has reported to the media that because councillors felt unsafe, they decided to push it through without discussion, without debate, just moved, seconded, voted on. And apparently the group that was present was quite confused because it was all over in a few seconds.
Yeah, I did.
Is that the right way to deal with it?
Yeah, look, I read about this, Chris, and look, you know, I haven't seen the recording of the meeting. Obviously, wasn't there. So, but I do have some, you know, concerns. I think I'm uncomfortable with the idea that one of the ways we, you know, respond to this sort of behaviour is that we, you know, we don't have the debate in front of our community. I think that also can help feed some of those conspiracy theories, but also I think we, you know, that's what's valuable about this democratic process. And, you know, I'm not critical of that mayor for a decision made on the spot at the time when people felt unsafe. But if that became, you know, the typical way to react to these sort of protests, I'd see that as counterproductive. I really think that it's good for the community to see even a diversity of views at council, you know, so maybe a majority, I don't know if this was a unanimous decision of the council or a majority decision, but I think it would have been good for the community to see a democratic process, a debate, a resolution, and council get behind that decision.
Yeah, I think all being equal, that I would certainly agree with that. These are different times, aren't they? So perhaps it's a tactic we might see used a little bit more. Closer to home, Latrobe City Council this week adopted a statement of support for the LGBTIQA plus community. This was in response to some recent examples of what are called transphobia and transmisogyny. One of its own councillors was tweeting articles and comments that were criticising transgender rights activists and saying a few other things that I won't bother repeating. But those were condemned by a number of people. But good to see that Latrobe Council has come out very strongly to put a positive message out there.
Yeah, I think this is part of their community access and inclusion policy, and certainly covers that commitment to supporting all people regardless of sexual identities, gender, but other things like age and ability and cultural background and that. But I think you're right, there is a backstory here, and there were some comments on Twitter by a particular council. I believe another council, I think Councillor Tracy Lund, came out and said, her daughter said, Mum, what can we do about this?
Yeah.
And that was a trigger, for her to think, let's look at a statement in the chamber of support. And one of the objectives of councils, which is written into the Local Government Act, so it's law, is that supporting diversity in our community, and so this is absolutely consistent with that.
Well done to Latrobe on that. A few other things have happened. We might move off that one now. Tony, always happy to hear people's thoughts on these topics if you want to get in touch with us. The Monitors report, the Municipal Monitor at Darebin, was released last week. John Watson was the Monitor. His term finished in January. The Minister released the report at the end of April. There's a lot in this. It's a big read. Have you had a look through?
I have had a look through, and Darebin is probably a council with probably the longest history of external intervention, I would have thought, since 96 or something. There's been a lot of external interventions at Darebin, and this is just the latest. I think John Watson was the Monitor for about 9 months there. And he was appointed in response to a series of allegations, some of which he's found evidence of, and some which he found no evidence of. So, for example, there were allegations of bullying between councillors. He hadn't observed that. He said it was mainly, a robust debate. But there were allegations of an overuse of meeting procedures, points of orders. He absolutely noted that was occurring, and I think what was particularly interesting for me was his comments about the first council meeting that he attended, I think in about April of last year, which he said was a relatively small agenda, and the meeting went for 5+ hours with lots and lots of points of order and references to meeting procedure and his comment was was one of the worst meetings that he'd attended.
And who wants to be part of a meeting that goes like that?
I mean,
we've all got better things to do.
That's right. So I'm really interested in his recommendations, because I think that if they are taken up by the minister, and that's a big question, but if they are taken up by the minister, or ultimately as part of this, cultural review that's occurring, then I think that there'll be certainly statewide implications. He basically recommended that arbiters have a better list of sanctions available to them. That arbiters, if they, for example, decide that a councillor needs further training, that should be at the councillor's personal cost potentially. That there should be some clarity provided on the purpose, the governance around councillor briefings. What is the position around confidentiality of information that's shared at those councillor briefings? And I think that can be something that councils do struggle with. I think he's also called for a more, a consistent councillor code of conduct that actually requires or mandates that councillors participate in an internal process before they launch the formal code of conduct, arbiter, councillor conduct panel type process. And we have seen at some councils, councillors not participating in that internal process, which is causing councils to go down this constant path of formal processes. And I think one of his observations was that in Darebin, I think that there were 15 councillor code of conduct formal processes in the period from April to the end of the year in 22 or something like that. So an extraordinary number of applications. Another recommendation was that there would be an annual mandatory council meeting that every councillor would have to attend, where they basically publicly recommit to adhering to the
Renew their
council
vows.
code of conduct, which
Yes.
I think it's not a bad idea.
No, it's not. Yeah. On the briefing session thing, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong. There's nothing in the Act that compels a councillor to attend and participate in a briefing session, is there? It's all about the ordinary council meeting or any special council meetings. Hence, it's always been this bit of a grey area.
That's right, and so you're spot on. There isn't that compulsion. We don't often there's different practices of councils, but often councils don't even report in terms of attendances at those meetings, whereas they would in relation to or they've got an obligation to in relation to the statutory meetings. And there was it seems some low attendance rates at Darebin in relation to councillor briefing sessions, and that was observed by the monitor. My view is that councillors should make the best use of those briefing sessions. They're an opportunity to probe, to ask questions, to get clarity, and I think they're a really valuable tool. And they're, unfortunately not used as well at some councils. But you're right, some clarity, some legislative clarity, I think would be useful.
So just before we move on off this, and we'll put a link in the show notes if anyone wants to read the report, the minister announced the release of the report last week, said that the council has provided a good governance action plan, which picks up on things that the monitors addressed in his report. But I noticed it was silent on those recommendations that have been made back to LGV or whoever. Should we be reading anything into that, or do you think it's going to be picked up as part of another process?
Look, it's hard to say, but I'd like to see some of the sector picking up on some of these recommendations and pursuing them with government. I don't agree with them all. I think there was a recommendation in there that was to make it an obligation of councillors to initiate sort of code of conduct processes if they observed a councillor openly criticising the council group or staff. It might sound reasonable in practice, but I think in reality that would create a real clogging of our code of conduct processes and can be used as a political tool at councils. But the rest of the recommendations I think are quite sound and could assist in I think improving governance and understanding at many of our councils.
So, Tony, another monitor matter just to deal with quickly. While I was away, the municipal monitors, the two of them at Geelong, apparently advised the minister that they were satisfied that the CEO recruitment process at the City of Greater Geelong could recommence. Now, this is, of course, after it was halted a few months back. The inspectorate had concerns that were raised with the minister, and the minister brought these two monitors, Prue Digby and Peter Dorling, in. So the pause button's been lifted.
Yeah, and I think that's right. The minister's accepted that recommendation, and those two monitors will stay in place to January next year while that process for appointment of a new full-time CEO takes place at Geelong. I would have thought that that's probably one of the coveted CEO roles in the state. The second biggest municipality probably by expenditure. So that'll be really interesting to watch that play out. Under the observation of the two monitors.
Yes, because they're around, I think, until January next year. It's a detail, I know, but I do get stuck on details sometimes. I would really like to know has the process been on hold and continues where it was, or is it being restarted? That doesn't really tell us that in the announcement, does it?
And I don't know where that's going. Yeah.
Perhaps someone can give us some insight into that, because that will determine, obviously, how much longer it's going to take. Up at Ganawara Shire in the north of the state, we've talked about this issue before, where one of the councillors made comments on social media about a Dustin Martin, AFL footballer story that caused quite some consternation in the community and with fellow councillors. That led to an arbiter process and a requirement to apologise, which the councillor's done of sorts.
Yeah, and I want to be careful on this one because I do, I do advise Ganawara Shire and including in relation to this matter, but just speaking generally, and you're certainly right, there's a public, a published arbiter decision, Yehudi Blasher, in this case, that there was a direction for Councillor Garner Smith to make an apology, and that apology to be published in local media as well, I believe. Yeah. So, but just speaking generally, and we know this from just real life reality, that there's different ways that there are sincere apologies and there are insincere apologies, and where your apology sits really is based on the language that's used, the demeanour in terms of how it's made, and there certainly would be some questions about whether this was a correct form of apology and a sincere form of an apology. Now, if it's not, then that would seem to me to be then a lack of compliance with the directions of the arbiter, which under the Local Government Act, there's a definition of serious misconduct, and it says, that's one of the elements that can make out serious misconduct. So potentially a referral to a councillor conduct panel.
And that referral would need to be by the council again, or could another party such as the inspectorate come in and...
That's right. So whilst it could be by the council through a resolution or a group of councillors just writing, or an individual councillor writing, absolutely the chief municipal inspector has is able to make referrals. And this may well be, I would think, an instance where there's a public decision that's been made, a published decision by the arbiter. There's a real interest across the sector in this. It might be a matter that the chief municipal inspector felt was appropriate to trigger that ability here. I'd like to think that there's a point where the chief municipal inspector will step in. He's got, they've got the power.
You would assume that they're across it. Hopefully that's the case. And I know they watch this program, so if they weren't aware of it, they are now. All right, we might leave that one there, given your involvement in that, Tony, and if anything else develops, we'll come back to it. While we're in the country, duck hunting is an emotive issue at this time of the year. At Loddon Shire, it's perhaps more emotive than in some other places because the council there has resolved its support for duck hunting as, I want to say, an ecotourism activity, something that's important for the economy and the mental health, I noticed the mayor saying, of the community, and some people have taken issue with that.
Yeah, look, I would, and I'm not a duck hunter. I'm not a registered shooter or anything like that, and I'm not into any sorts of hunting myself. It's not my thing. But I'd say, good on the council for coming out. If I suspect that a large proportion of the population at Loddon, potentially the majority, may well support duck hunting, and it's clearly a relevant issue for that community, and clearly, more broadly, there are discussions about limiting, potentially banning duck hunting. So I think it's reasonable for the council to come out with a position on this. Do I agree with the position? Not personally, but I think that it would be right to say it's probably a long-standing tradition in Loddon, and you and I grew up in rural and regional areas, and we know that lots of people participate in these activities.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I don't agree with it. I agree with the council's right to form an opinion and have an opinion. And like we were talking back at the start of the program, for there to be reasoned and logical and respectful debate about these issues. I'm a huge American country music fan, Tony. You may or may not be aware. And very often some of my very favorite singers sing about hunting and fishing and, you know, all those things that are part of that culture. I don't like those songs because I don't agree with those activities, but I understand that they're just intrinsic to the way those communities have been formed over many years. So each to their own, I suppose, while it's legal. All right, I'm feeling a bit like I'm on the soapbox a bit today, and I don't normally do that, or I don't mean to anyway. Let's go down to the Mornington Peninsula briefly. A story that hit in the Herald Sun yesterday, was on some of the national news bulletins last night. Traders down there are feeling disaffected and are trying to work up a campaign to become the next Queenscliff. Basically, they want to secede as a little borough down there on the tip of the peninsula.
Yeah, and I think this is largely driven by sort of commercial interest. I gather that there's been a permit issued by the council for, you know, a food van on the foreshore at Sorrento, and you know, that's a commercial issue for some of the established traders in Sorrento. Chris, I don't think this is going to go far in terms of the government taking this up. I understand those traders have written to local government Victoria and asked for some direction on, you know, how they can pursue this idea. I think sustainability, you know, is an issue for many municipalities, and the direction we're going is not smaller municipalities that are sort of focused around one community township. It's a consolidation, if anything. So I doubt it's going to go anywhere, but you know, they've got the right to advocate for that. And we've seen this before. Sunbury was another place.
Yarrawonga is trying to exit.
Right? Yes,
Moira, that's right. We've heard nothing on that in the past few weeks. Exit, that's right. Yeah. No, I think you're right. The trend would be to larger councils, as is happening in Tasmania at the moment. It's very widely believed that the result of the review might be amalgamations in Tasmania. But anyway, we'll watch with interest. Another thing we'll watch with interest is a just announced upper house inquiry in the Victorian Parliament into cost shifting and the whole funding model of local government. It's been brought forward by the opposition. Have we ever seen a particularly targeted inquiry into the way local government's funded in Victoria like this?
Look, I suspect we have, but one doesn't come to mind. But I think this is a really, you know, I read the agenda, if you like, of the it's the Legislative Council's Economy and Infrastructure Committee. And that, you know, what a really ambitious list of areas they wanted to look into. It was not, you know, not just cost shifting onto local councils, but, you know, the overall revenue structure and sustainability of local government in the state and service delivery and such. And, you know, I think it's going to be quite difficult for there to be, you know, comprehensive report on such a vexed issue.
And I heard the term core services used, and I thought, here we go. Good luck defining. People have different views on what the core business of councils should be. And as we know, under the principles-based Local Government Act 2020, it's up to individual councils to determine what the services are that their community requires. What's core to that community?
Yeah, so look, we'll watch this. We'll no doubt report on it in weeks and months to come. But you know, I don't see that it as being the big sort of change bringer for the sector.
All right, we'll get to the pick of the week in 1 second. I just want to send a note of congratulations out to Evan King, the CEO at the City of Ballarat, who received a contract renewal over the past couple of weeks, which is great news for Evan and for stability in that organisation. You know, I like to keep an eye on the CEO movements, Tony. We've talked about Geelong, we've got Melbourne, and I think Stonington yet to be. Is it Stonington? Yet to be determined. Your pick of the week is an interesting one, and I'm going to counter it with another interesting one.
Yeah, Chris, how many days a week do you work, Chris? Would it be one and a half?
It depends how I'm feeling these days. Maybe
Yeah, that'd be
two.
right. My pick of the week's about the 4-day working week, and at a council in Queensland is actively considering this. Western Downs Regional Council is considering a 4-day working week. They've received a report, and the report's suggesting that implementation of a 4-day work week could, improve staff satisfaction, retention, productivity, these sorts of things. Council hasn't made a decision yet, but I noted in the report, I think it was an ABC news report, that nearby Lockyer Valley Regional Council has, unbeknown to me, has for many years had this 4-day work week for at least some staff, seemingly those particularly those outdoor staff in parks and roads, who apparently work a 9.5-hour work day in order to work this 4-day week. And the outcomes of that, what we're hearing is it's apparently working really well at Lockyer Valley. It's distinctive, it's attracting staff, and we know how difficult it is to attract staff to the sector. So I think it's an interesting concept, and I think it might well catch on in the local government sector. We are a sector that often leads in these things, and it's something in the kit bag, I think, for councils in terms of that, combating that challenge around retaining staff.
I think you're right. It's certainly one to watch. And my pick of the week is an addendum to your pick of the week, in that we've also had news just this past week out of the UK, where the first UK council to trial a 4-day week has just reported on the success of that, and they've described it as an undeniable success. And they're going to extend, it's been for their 450 desk-based workers. They're going to extend it for another 12 months and start a 3-month trial for refuse workers who work in that outdoor space, of course. This is South Cambridgeshire Council that started the pilot in January, and so it's happening in a few places, and I'm sure lots of people are taking notice, and we might see a lot more of it.
Yeah, I suspect it might be inevitable if we're seeing that. It's not just in theory, people arguing for it. We're actually seeing evidence of it working in local government contexts, regional Queensland, in the UK. I think it's a matter of time before we see a Victorian council take it up. Maybe unbeknown to you and I, there may well be elements of that at some Victorian councils.
I think you'll find there might be some pockets in certain award arrangements with some outdoor places that are just sticking in my mind, where there might have been those sorts of arrangements in place for some time, but certainly not on any broad sense. So yeah, unless someone corrects us. All right, we'll keep an eye on it. That's been a lot to get through, Tony. Great to catch up with you. What sort of a week have you got ahead of you next week?
Yeah, a bit of travel. I'm around the place again still, which I really enjoy getting out to councils, be they metro ones or regional rural ones, and spending some time with executive management teams or with individual councils. So a bit of that going on, and we'll probably get a bit of varying weather as I travel across the state in May.
Yes, it's definitely getting cooler. You want to try coming from 33 degrees in Las Vegas to, what was it here yesterday? 16, I think, hence the head cold, I think.
Get the beanie for the weekend.
Yes.
That's my tip.
So just a couple of quick plugs before we go. We released an episode of our new Local Leaders series from VLGA Connect last week, I think it was, in which I do an in-depth interview with Ben Ramcharan, who's the Mayor of Nillumbik Shire Council. It's worth a listen. Ben's a really interesting young man with some terrific ideas on his future in politics and beyond. And we've got some more of those local leaders interviews lined up to bring you in the very near future. And next Friday, I think it is the 12th of May, we've got a live panel session with 3 mayors that came through the flood crisis last year. We're going to talk about observations, learnings, what they might do differently next time. I think it'll be a really interesting discussion. So look out and be part of that if you can.
Definitely, I'll be tuning in, watching.
Thanks, Tony. See you next time on TGU. That's Tony Rownick from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, our terrific sponsors of TGU from VLGA Connect. Thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you again soon.